Hello, I am Refiana Putri from TBI 4C. Here, I made this video to fulfill my final assessment from the listening for argumentative course, namely is debate reactions video. Here, I have one video debate I will read, to which has motion, that is, the United States should be abolish the death penalty. Okay, first I will show you the video. Listen carefully, okay?
In the 1972 Furman v. Georgia Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court banned the death penalty until the government could administer it properly. Well, we've had 40 years to do so, and the death penalty is just as bad as it was. For example, on September 21st, 2011, an African-American man named Troy Davis was executed for allegedly killing an off-duty white police officer, a crime he almost certainly did not commit. After the case, 7 out of the 9 witnesses recanted their statements and stated that they were pressured into testimony by the police. For another example, Clayton Lockett, in April of 2014, was given an untested sedative prior to receiving the death penalty serum, and that failed to knock him out. He writhed in agony on the table for 43 minutes before finally succumbing to a heart attack. As you can see, Judge, the death penalty is a broken and failing system. Hello, my name is Philip Bonanno from the Hackley School, and we represent the proposition on the motion that the United States should abolish the death penalty. Our first argument is that the death penalty is inherently unjust and unfair. The institutional racism in this country does not just stop when someone's life is at stake. The U.S. General Accounting Office reported to Congress that their synthesis of 28 studies shows racial disparities in the charging, sentencing, and imposition of the death penalty after the Furman v. Georgia Supreme Court case. According to Death Penalty Information Center, for every 12 African Americans executed for killing a white man, there is only 1 white man executed for killing an African American man. No, thank you. Next, in Pennsylvania, the rate of actually sentencing someone to death is 40% higher if you are black than white. Houston has executed 70% of African Americans compared to only 20% of whites up for execution. The racial bias in this is terrible. We cannot put someone's life at stake just because of the color of their skin. 1 second. This is not a punishment that fits the crime. It is a punishment that fits the predetermined bias of jurors, yes?
It's not the death penalty that's racist, it's the court system. You can't blame the death penalty for the racism in our courts if you have a problem with it at all.
However, people's lives are at stake because of the jurors being racist, and we could kill an innocent man with the Troy Davis example just because maybe he was African American or predetermined bias on the jurors, and we cannot, 1 innocent life is way too many to spend. Our second argument is that the death penalty does not deter crime. The notion that the death penalty deters crime is false and illogical and goes against large bodies of research to the contrary. Murder rates have declined and are declining everywhere in the U.S. except for the South, where the death penalty is most prevalent. In the South, they have the highest overall murder rate and 80% of all executions. In the Northeast, they have under 1% of all executions, and they have the lowest overall murder rate in the United States. According to a 2008 survey done by Death Penalty Information Center, they asked 500 police chiefs from across the country what was the most effective way of reducing violent crimes. No, thank you. They ranked the death penalty dead last at under 1%. Robert Morgenthau, former district attorney in New York, said, and quote, "I am not convinced that capital punishment in and of itself is a deterrent to crime." If it does not deter crime, then why do we have it? Yes.
We have it to provide justice to those people whose family members were murdered.
Yes, but this only drags on the process for these family members. The average appeal for these death penalties are 16 to 20 years. Reform it. We've had 40 years to do so, and we haven't changed a single thing. The jails have evolved. Everything else has evolved. The death penalty has not evolved since the 1972 Furman v. Georgia case. Our third argument is that the death penalty, the life without parole, is significantly less expensive than the death penalty. Reminding housing the hundreds of people on death row and the expenses that we spend on their housing, where they have extra guards and private cells. The government wastes millions of dollars per year. This is money that we could be spending on getting to the root of crime. If these 500 police chiefs actually rank this at under 1%, then it's not reducing crime. The racial bias, in California, they spend $141 million per year on the death penalty and $90,000 per year for each person in the death penalty for private housing. In Nebraska, just this week, abolished the death penalty. Finally, Judge, I would like to go to the immoral and inhumane argument. An ethical decision is made on whether it increases societal well-being. Well, it does not increase the person being executed. It does not increase the well-being of the families. It does not increase the well-being of our economic system. It is 100% immoral and should be abolished. Finally, Judge, let me leave you with this. In a proposition world, there would be no deaths because of a racial bias. We'd eliminate an outdated and barbaric practice. We would eliminate wasting taxpayer money on this outdated practice and use the money to reduce violent crimes. This is what we gain from abolishing the death penalty. What do we gain by keeping it? Thank you, and please vote for the proposition.
Judges and timer ready? Begin. The death penalty, reserved for the most heinous of crimes, including terrorist acts of murder and large-scale massacres, such as the offenses committed by Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, Timothy McVeigh, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ramzi Youssef, and John Wayne Gacy. We can't abolish the death penalty because we need it to deal with the worst of the worst terrorists and mass murderers like these. I'm going to first state our counterplan for this debate. We believe that the death penalty should not be abolished. It should be reformed so that it is only used for the most heinous of mass murderers and terrorists when evidence is beyond all doubt. With DNA technologies and high-quality surveillance systems, these cases of such beyond all doubt conviction do exist. Let's look at Tsarnaev for an example. My colleagues and I will be utilizing the opposition block to refute our opponent's points in the second and third speakers. Okay. On to my first argument. Americans consistently favor the death penalty for the worst of the worst murderers. As a democracy, the U.S. government promises to serve the will of the people and majority rules. In October of 2014, a Gallup poll said these two things. Americans' support of the death penalty varied over time, but except for one poll in 1966, always America has shown consistent favorability for the death penalty. In the U.S., 63% of Americans has shown consistent favorability for the death penalty. In the U.S., 63% of Americans prefer the death penalty for convicted murderers versus life in prison without parole. Another poll by CBS News in April 15th in 2015 said that 60% of Americans wanted the death penalty for Tsarnaev. Additionally, in April 2015, the Pew Research Center had a survey and said that 63% of Americans think that the death penalty is morally justified. As our country is founded on the principles of democracy, we must listen to the majorities. And if the majority of Americans clearly favor the use of the death penalty for people like Tsarnaev, then we should use them. Our second argument is that the death penalty helps victims' families, and society feel safer knowing that the murderer cannot murder again. Even in high-security prisons, convicted murderers can commit more homicides, escape, or influence additional murders, causing more suffrage from innocent victims. In 2011, by the Arizona Republic, they said that a convicted murderer, Jasper Rushing, killed 3 inmates, one of them being a mentally ill Shannon Palmer, because he was talking too much. In 2008, according to the USA Today, another convicted murderer, Kevin Johns, killed an inmate on a prison bus. In 2004, according to the Cincinnati Tribune, twice convicted murderer Timothy Hancock admitted to the strangulation of his cellmate Jason Wagner. History.com reports that of December 2000, 7 rapists, murderers, and thieves escaped a maximum security prison by overpowering their guards and civilian employees. At the end of their rampage, they shot Officer Aubrey Hawkins and ran him over with his own truck on Christmas Eve. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, 672 prison homicides occurred from 2001 to 2012. The death penalty? Yes.
The way you define the death penalty as reformation is that it would only be used for the most heinous of crimes, including terrorists. So all the people you just listed were not under your definition of people who would get the death penalty and are therefore irrelevant to your very frame.
Thank you. We also said mass murderers, and these are not people who are murdering out of crimes of passion. They are mass murderers if they're continuing to murder again, even after they begin a life sentence. No, thank you. There is no attempt at reforming the murderer with life in prison without parole, and they can further murder again, as proven with our evidence. We must ensure the safety of American people from the worst of the worst, and the death penalty is the only form of justice that provides this, and that is the death penalty. So our third argument is that the death penalty provides the best form of justice when a murder occurs. Our reasoning for this is that the death penalty provides retribution for a murder. The American Law Dictionary states that retribution is at the heart of all judicial systems in this country that deal with law and order. They said that moral justification of the death penalty can be justified by one simple principle. Punishment must be roughly apportioned in severity to the nature of the crime. It's proportionate, the death penalty, which is retribution. The death penalty is retribution and justified in the Supreme Court case of Gregg versus Georgia, where the Supreme Court held that the death penalty is not unconstitutional and could serve the social purpose of retribution if the death penalty meets a proportionality requirement. In conclusion, the death penalty is backed up by the citizens of America, justified by the Supreme Court, and serves as the best punishment for the worst of the worst. In order to win this debate, the proposition must prove that democracy is wrong, the Supreme Court is wrong, and our citizens will not be harmed again by these murderers. Thank you.
The proposition speaker will now be heard.
Hello, my name is Robert Patterson, and I am the second proposition speaker on the motion that the United States should abolish the death penalty. First, I would like to refute a few of my opponent's points, then I would like to go back and strengthen my own team's points. So, the opposition first stated that they would like to reform, as a counterplan, reform the death penalty, and we were explicitly told when we were given this topic that we are not to frame or counterplan, but regardless, we will fight this counterplan. And also, when they talk about reforming the death penalty, we've had 40 years since it was reinstated to reform the death penalty, and we've done nothing to fix it. It's still a broken practice. Their first argument is that it's popular, and 63% of the United States favor the death penalty. Well, Judge, as you can see, in recent years, the death penalty favor has gone down drastically and has been going down steadily.
Still majority.
Yes, it's still a majority today, but I guarantee you, in 10 years down the road, it will no longer be a majority. As polls show, it is going down drastically, and the majority of the rest of the world is not in favor of the death penalty. Their second point is that murderers and heinous criminals cannot murder again or cannot cause acts of terror on the world again if they are killed. And killing is the only way to stop them from murdering again. They give a few anecdotal stories of how people can escape and people can murder again. This is not the majority of the prison system, and while the prison system is not perfect, it is still a better
Information?
No, thank you. It is still a better difference than the death penalty. The third argument is that it's the best form of justice and that it causes retribution and the punishment is proportionate to the crime. Well, as this will go into in one of my first arguments, is that it is immoral and inhumane, and vengeance is not necessarily the best form of retribution. So now I'd like to go on and state our own team's points. The first point I would like to bring up is that the death penalty is immoral and inhumane. Our first subpoint is that this makes victims feel even worse. Take this quote. No, thank you. Watching the execution left me with horror and emptiness, confirming what I had already come to realize. Capital punishment only continues the violence that has a powerful, corrosive effect on society. Yes.
It doesn't matter if some people think it is because the majority think it's okay, along with the Supreme Court, who has justified it recently.
So to counter that point, again, popularity is going down, and Justice Stevens, who was originally in favor of reinstating the death penalty 40 years ago, has now, just a couple days ago, come out and said that they made a huge mistake and should not have reinstated it. So you say it's just one person. Well, this is one of the most prevalent people in favor on the Supreme Court, no thank you, in favor of the death penalty. So this quote is a horrifying quote coming from Ronald, a 29-year-old in Texas, after witnessing the execution of the murderer of his sister. And this shows that many victims are not in favor of it, and including they brought up the example of Jakhar Tsarnaev. The majority of people not related to the crimes are in favor of it, but when you look at the victims' families, they are not in favor of it.
Source.
If you take, for example, this one comes from the New York Times, and if you look at what happened with Jakhar Tsarnaev, the family who lost their very young child is not in favor of him being given the death penalty. No, thank you. Another statistic is that 60% of families victims' families who have experienced the death penalty of their murderer have claimed experiencing hallucinations and feel estranged from societies and show symptoms of post-traumatic stress. The impact of this is huge. If the death penalty is about justice, it can't be about justice because it makes victims' families feel even worse. And take, for example, that it keeps the wound opened. When it takes 16 or 20 years on average, no thank you, for the death penalty to actually be administered, once it's given, it keeps the wound opened and cannot help the victims' families. Our second subpoint is that innocent people can be killed with the death penalty.
Our plan.
Again, you brought up the counterplan. We refuted this by saying we're not supposed to have a counterplan. But so at least 10 innocent people have been killed with a death penalty over the last 40 years. Take, for example, and we know that 153 innocent people have been exonerated from death row. 153 innocent people that were not guilty of any crime that could have been killed.
Exonerated.
Exonerated, right? So they were found.
System working.
They were found not guilty and they were removed from death row. But 10 people, one life is way too many. But when you have 10 innocent people killed by this practice, it can no longer be used. Our other points was that it is economically a huge waste of money. It does not cause deterrence, as we have shown, and the death penalty is inherently unfair. Thank you, and please vote for the proposition.
Student time ready? Begin. Shortly after Nathaniel Gordon's life ended in 1862 with the death penalty, Abraham Lincoln, who had the power to grant clemency, wrote, "I think I would personally prefer to let this man live in confinement and let him meditate on his deeds. Yet in the name of justice and the majesty of law, there ought to be one case, at least one specific incident of a professional slave trader, a northern white man, given the exact penalty of death because of the incalculable number of deaths he and his kind inflicted upon men during the horror voyage across sea of Africa. Even Abraham Lincoln, a president known for giving clemency from the death penalty, used the death penalty for the worst of the worst, directly in line with our plan. Hi, I'm Michael Sherlock, and I strongly believe that the United States should continue using the death penalty. I'd like to start off by refuting my opponent's points. First, they said we weren't told to have a counterplan, but you can go ask John Meany right up there, and the email never said anything about that. Second of all, they said that people were innocent people, get it? But first of all, according to my plan, you need video and DNA evidence. And if we don't have that, guess what? They don't get the death penalty. That still hasn't gone refuted. And also, if we have DNA and video evidence, then that means they honestly did it. For example, Sarnev, it is very accessible. When he was shot while shooting at police officers, we had DNA at the crime scene. We also had video of him doing it. No, thank you. Their second point was that there's botched and immoral executions. But in a Supreme Court case entitled Bays versus Reese, the Supreme Court held that even after a series of botched executions, they still said that the Constitution says it's okay.
Yes, they did say that it's constitutional. However, they also said in the Georgia v. Furman case that it needs to change. It has not.
That was 40 years ago. And guess what? They actually did. The Timely Justice Act occurred in Florida in 2003 and did reform the time doing it. So there has been change, which directly proves that there has been change. Their final point was that it is racist. But that is not a problem with the death penalty. That is a problem with our legal system. According to the ACLU, the U.S. General Accounting Office reported that in 28 studies that race of victims' influence was found in all states of the criminal justice system. Therefore, this isn't unique to the death penalty. And according to our counterplan, you won't need to worry about this because we only need video and DNA evidence. So they can't convict based off race because they will need video and DNA evidence, which they can't construe because of race, yes?
You said that this is true throughout the justice system, but wouldn't you agree that when you're putting someone's life on the line, race should have no place?
But guess what? That's not going to have a place because you only need DNA and evidence to convict. Race is not going to be a factor anymore. Well, guess what? Once we institute this with the reform, then there won't be any more bias. And then their final point was that there's no deterrence, but we can't know that for sure. Correlation isn't causation, and there's too many variables to go into this. For example, states have different populations, different levels of poverty, and different levels of crime. So two experts on the topic, Daniel S. Nargan, PhD professor of public policy and statistics at Carnegie Mellon University, and John V. Pepper, a professor of economics at the University of Virginia, wrote, "Research to date on the effects of capital punishment on the effect of crime is not informative whether or not capital punishment decreases, increases, or has no effect on the crime rates. Therefore, you cannot say that the death penalty is not connected to murder rates." Because these two experts have spent their whole life focusing on this, all say that we can't know for sure if there's any effect on it because there are too many variables. And their final point was that there's money. In a minute. That it costs too much money. Well, in California alone, just by shrinking the number of death penalty eligible crimes to 5, we save $56 million a year, which is directly in our plan, limiting it to the worst of the worst. And also, if we just reduce the number of time in between appeals, it will go a lot faster. And also, we would save $55 million, allotting to $111 million a year just in California alone through reforming it. And also, they brought up that there's post-traumatic stress for the victims and stuff, but you know what happens to victims who know that the person who murdered their young child is still alive in a prison somewhere? They have post-traumatic stress too. They have different economic effects on them because they know that the person is still alive. And also, if we put these people in prison, it has statistically been proven that they are going to kill again. 672 murders have occurred in prison from murderers. That means that no one is safe if they are still alive. If we really want to protect our society, we have no option but to put them to death. When we put people to death, we are saving more people who are innocent, and more people who we want to survive. And also, the Supreme Court says it's justified. The people say it's justified. The Constitution says it's justified. Abraham Lincoln has said it's justified. And overall, the majority of people say it's justified. Why should we change it when it has been reformed and we can continue to reforming it? Thank you.
The opposition rebuttals will now be heard.
Alright. Judges and timekeeper ready? Begin. Hello, my name is Jenna Dyer. I'd like to start off by refuting my opponent's points, then I'll restate our arguments, and finally I'll weigh out this debate. Now that my second speaker has refuted their main points, I'd like to go on to refute the finer details of their points. Their speaker stated in a POI that our examples for our argument are not the worst of the worst, the ones that we stated have killed in prison. However, that's because the worst of the worst get the death penalty right now, because the United States has had the death penalty for federal crime. Like we'd stated in our refutation to their argument when saying that we need to use reforms, and in our POI, by reducing the number of death sentence eligible crimes to 5, we will ensure that it only has the worst and the worst and save $55 million just in California per year. Imagine if these people got out. Imagine if these people were in the prison scheme. That would be so much worse, and thank you for proving our point. Another one of their points was that 153 people were exonerated and 40 people were killed. But I'd like to, by innocent people. But I'd like to remind you, how would you clear someone of the death penalty? Through DNA evidence. What is our plan? To use DNA evidence. The same evidence is used to convict and to exonerate. Even according to them, our plan would work. Their next point was that victims don't want it, and that it's vengeance, and that people get PTSD, and that it keeps wounds open. But do you know what keeps wounds open? Knowing that the person that killed your child has killed again. What really keeps wounds open is knowing that the people are not safe and that there is no way to ensure the safety of the American people.
Most victims' families disagree.
That is what keeps the wounds open, and that is why we need the death penalty. They stated that the need for the death penalty is going down and that people don't want it anymore. But as they still stated, the majority still want it. We are still a democracy, not a dictatorship. We need the death penalty because we listen to the will of the people, because we're America and that is what we do. They also stated that the Supreme Court case was longer ago, but their only Supreme Court case was 40 years ago, and so that doesn't make any sense. They also stated that we have not made any reforms, but as I've already proven, there are reforms in the process in California, and Florida has passed the Timely Justice Act. Therefore, it makes sense. And now I'd like to go on to refute their refutation to the counter plan. They stated their only refutation to our counter plan is we weren't supposed to have one, but we were supposed to have one because that is what a debate is. Furthermore, our counter plan states that you need DNA evidence, a video, or a confession. And we will use these, and that refutes their point about the fact that innocent people do it. I'd like to go on to weigh this debate. First, I'd like to go on to refute, to further our points, sorry. Our first point was that the death penalty helps victims' family and society feel safer, knowing that the murderer cannot murder again. This is important because it ensures the safety of the American people, and it provides the justice needed for the death penalty. Our next argument was the American people want the death penalty. We're a democracy, and we need to use it. And our final point was that the Supreme Court has stated that we need the death penalty. I'd like to go on to weigh this debate. Prisons have four major purposes. These purposes are retribution, incapacitation, deterrence, and rehabilitation, according to the organization Stop the Crime. Deterrence and rehabilitation will not occur no matter what venue is used to stop these murderers. And so no matter the venue, now we must fulfill retribution and incapacitation to the best of our ability. Only the death penalty truly provides this. Providing justice and ensuring mass murderers, terrorists, and criminals to the worst degree never harm again. That is why the death penalty is the best option. They have not proven another alternative, a better alternative, that our democracy is wrong, that the Supreme Court is wrong, and the people will be safe. In their world, they have one where they use life in prison without the possibility of parole, including solitary confinement, making people go insane. In our world, we have security, safety, following our Constitution. For justice' sake, we cannot abolish the death penalty. Thank you.
Ready? Judge, in Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, he asked this union on the verge of a civil war to appeal to the better angels of their nature. Well, we would ask that you appeal to the better angels of your nature in resolving this debate. Hi, I'm Tucker Wilkie. I'll be the proposition rebuttalist for the topic that's the U.S. should abolish death penalty. So first, I'd like to review my opponent's major points and their counter plan, re-strengthen our own points, and then weigh the debate and show why we really should abolish the death penalty. So most of my opponent's points fall under two main categories. One, it provides justice and retribution for families, and two, it is what the people want. So I'll start with the former. They've given all these anecdotes of what they think about how it will bring retribution to people's families, it will make them feel better, and that this is what the people want. But that is not what actually happens on victims' families. That might be what happened hypothetically in your mind. But when it comes to victims' families, that is not true. The parents of the 3-year-olds who died in the Boston bombing came out and said they do not support the death penalty for Ashok Arsanayab because that means he will be in the publicity and for news for much longer, and they will be unable to hear. And in Massachusetts, only 20% of people said that they supported the death penalty for Ashok Arsanayab. Nationally, 6% of people, but in Boston, where it actually happened, only 20% of people said they were in favor of the death penalty. So by your logic, if we're going by the will of the people in Massachusetts, where the crime actually happened, then the death penalty would not have occurred there. And their next point. Their other point is going on to the justice point about how it fulfills retribution. But it doesn't fulfill retribution in the best possible way. It only makes it worse for victims' families. We gave the example of someone who said after they watched the execution of the person who murdered their sister that they felt much worse. Judge, all the arguments that the opposition gave about, we just gave the example of Ashok Arsanayab's parents. Another example from the ACLU, there was a girl who, when she was 6, her father was murdered. And she said she stayed up all night crying about how she did not want the murder to get the death penalty, because even at 6 she knew that fighting violence with violence only leads to more violence. Their victim families do not support the death penalty. And then if you go on to the point about how it's with the Constitution, that's what the democracy wants, that's what people want. But as we said, death penalty is declined. Multiple states have abolished the death penalty, including Nebraska. It is still a very slight majority, only 10%, and the government needs to make this decision for the betterment of the people. Looking at the evidence, they need to show that when they're weighing the evidence, with the slight will of the people should not be weighed more than all the points that we've had. And then I'll next address their counterplan. They said that the way they're going to frame it, that it's going to be only DNA evidence and only video evidence, and that this is going to end all racial bias in sentencing. Judge, this should sound completely illogical to you. First off, their counterplan seems very impossible to put in, as we showed 40 years ago, a similar plan was instituted by the Supreme Court, and none of it ended up happening. Death penalty is still broken. And two, the point about that is that they said that DNA evidence and video evidence will be needed. But does that mean that automatically happens if the judges see some DNA evidence or questionable DNA evidence that they're going to immediately convict a person? No, of course not. You can't institute that law. Therefore, the racial bias will still be present. We will still be sentencing people based on the color of their skin. Then it comes to the deterrence argument. We said that that it does not deter crime. They said, well, you can never know. Well, if the burden is on the people saying it deters crime, not on the people saying it does not deter crime. So that argument goes our way because we're showing that it does not deter crime.
Provides justice.
It does not provide justice for the victims' families or for the people, as I proved multiple times already. Now I'd like to weigh this debate. So, Judge, let's think tomorrow. If we abolish death penalty, what will we gain and what will we lose? Let's start with the opposition. What will we lose? We have already shown that it does not deter crime, does not provide justice for victims' families. So the only point they have is a slight 10% majority of people across the country, many of whom don't know it. Now let's look what we gain. We would first off gain millions of dollars back immediately that could be used for more humane causes to end crime. We would be able to get moral to show the world that we understand that fighting violence with violence only leads to more violence. Mahatma Gandhi once said, an eye for an eye just makes the whole world blind. Well, Judge, let's stop blinding the world. Thank you. And for these reasons, we are proud to propose.
Thank you very much to both teams for an outstanding debate. I'll ask them to now shake hands and await the deliberation of the judging panel. I'm going to announce the decision for our championship debate. And one thing that I need to note before I announce the decision, yes, there's a first and second place, but the first and second place is based on this debate, but it is not about this single debate. These are debate teams that have defeated only other undefeated debate teams in Eastern and Western championships based on league participation and then qualifying teams at championship tournaments from throughout the country. This is about first and second place for the United States for middle school debating, and you should recognize the students for their year-long and national championship accomplishments, not only for this single debate, despite the rigor that I think we could all agree on and outstanding performances for both teams for this debate. If we can give them a final round of applause. I'll announce the second place team first, and that is the opposition from the Pegasus School. And this year's MSPDP national champion, the Hackley School.
Okay, we have seen the video together, and now I will give direction to the video of debate earlier. Okay, first that for the first speaker from the proposition team, he have given the definition or background of the motion. Then he gave the first argument to strengthen the reason why the United States should abolish the death penalty. And then for the second speaker, he was able to provide an accurate rebuttal based on the motions. He conveyed using strong argument as well. And finally, for the third speaker, he had summed up all the argument well to break his opponent's argument. Okay, let's continue for the team opposition. They gave argument against the team's propositions arguments in great detail. All of the speakers were able to provide evidence of rebuttal for the motions given by the team propositions. And as we saw, they all give points. So this debate is really interesting, right? And I hope this video can be guideline for all of us to learn how to debate. Okay, that's all for my video debate section. I hope this can be useful for you. Bye bye.